You know, this company doesn't exist anymore. If you had told me 10 years ago that Facebook would overtake Google and become the biggest company in the world, I would have laughed at your face. But their main business, smartphones, only contributed $1.8 billion of that. What happened? Why did such a dominant company literally vanish into thin air? Well, buckle up. Well, to understand that, we need to look at what everyone else was doing. At the time, there were two main types of phones, the flip phone and the bar phone. Everyone thought it looked pretty cool, but they all agreed it was just a fancy gadget that no one would buy. Initially, Android was seen as just another competitor, and nothing really changed. But behind the scenes, something big was happening. That way, when the iPhone took off and proved that there was a market for smart devices, Samsung was ready. The same thing happened with Android. While Nokia saw it as nothing more than a tiny competitor, Samsung and others embraced it, causing Android to quickly grow in popularity. Even Steve Jobs couldn't sell too many iPhones because most of them broke after a month. I'm just kidding. iPhones were obviously great, but you get my point. Now, small developers could upload their apps to Apple's platform, and Apple would take a commission based on the sale. This way, instead of having thousands of agreements with manufacturers, app developers could simply publish their apps once and reach millions of users. See, consumers were starting to upgrade their phones every 2 to 3 years, which was music to Nokia's ears. Eventually, less than 1% of smartphones shipped with Symbian, so Nokia needed a new OS. They had two options. 1, build their own modern OS called MeeGo, or 2, join Android. See, each CEO had a different vision for the company, causing drastic shifts in strategy. In fact, I used it myself and it was beautiful. But it suffered from two major issues. You see, Windows Phone was nowhere near as popular as Android or iOS, so most developers didn't bother creating apps for it. This meant that Nokia's phones were stuck with basic apps and services, pushing consumers away and cementing Nokia's irrelevancy. See, Nokia had spent billions of dollars on R&D over the years, giving them 4,000 patents that were crucial for Microsoft's mobile ambitions. The rights to the Nokia brand are owned by HMD Global, a Finnish company. So in 2016, HMD licensed the brand and started making Android phones. 1, lack of apps, and 2, lack of consumers. And in 2013, they sold their mobile phone division to Microsoft for $7.2 billion. If Nokia had focused on making smartphones earlier, they would have stood a better chance. Sure, their core market would have been lost, but there was an even bigger market out there waiting to be tapped. Even though Microsoft tried their best, they simply couldn't compete against Apple and Google. All of this chaos created a toxic environment where employees didn't feel motivated. Instead, they were confused and stressed out. For example, some wanted to focus on MeeGo, while others wanted to bet everything on Android. You guessed it, they chose option 3, which was to do both at the same time. If you want to succeed, you need to support the developers and create an enabling ecosystem. They built MeeGo, but also partnered with Intel to make Bada phones, which were based on Symbian. Take competitors seriously. No one likes competition, but ignoring them will always backfire. Just ask Kodak or Blockbuster, you see. Nokia desperately wanted to create a modern OS that would rival iOS and Android. Comment below. Also, make sure to subscribe for more incredible business stories. Thank you for watching. So in 2011, they struck a deal with Microsoft to use their Windows Phone OS. In fact, their strategy was to simply continue offering low-end and mid-range phones to cash in on this trend. After all, they thought their core market wouldn't jump on the smartphone bandwagon. Bar phones were your typical brick-like shape, and flip phones, well, they flipped open. At the time, they used Symbian, which was an older OS that was clunky, slow, and not very friendly towards developers. The problem was that Symbian worked well for feature phones, but it was completely outdated for smartphones. But guess what? None of these phones offered too much in terms of functionality. There were maybe a few games and basic apps. Phones were quite expensive and people kept them for years. So Nokia decided to make their phones more durable and user-friendly. That way, their phones could withstand a drop or two and actually offer some cool features, so people didn't need to upgrade as often. They also created an app store, which was unprecedented at the time. And I know this might sound crazy, but before the App Store, app developers usually made agreements with manufacturers like Nokia to pre-install their apps on their devices. But this was problematic. First, This approach slowed down updates, since Nokia had to manually negotiate with thousands of developers. Second, it was extremely hard for small developers to get their apps on Nokia's devices. Since Nokia preferred working with bigger names, you're about to learn one of the greatest business stories ever told. And if you had told me that Nokia would become irrelevant, I would have laughed even harder. But yet here we are today. In fact, today Nokia doesn't just exist, it makes money. In fact, they made $9 billion in revenue last year. Chapter 1. Too big to fail. Let me set the stage for you. They made billions, paid out massive dividends, and continued to expand. However, cracks were already beginning to show, and those cracks would soon become gigantic fissures. Nokia was founded in 1865 in Finland, originally making rubber and later expanding to electronics. But it wasn't until 1992, when mobile phones were becoming popular, that Nokia started to gain traction. By the end of the 90s, Nokia was selling 35 million units a year and became the largest mobile phone manufacturer in the world. In fact, at one point, they controlled 40% of the entire market. But how did they do it, and that was it? As other companies struggled to compete with Nokia's durability and functionality, Nokia got complacent. Chapter 2. Underestimating the competition.
8.
The first sign of trouble came in 2007 when Apple launched the iPhone. In 2008, things went from bad to worse when Google announced Android, which was basically an open-source operating system that any manufacturer could use. See, while Nokia was busy dishing out massive dividends and increasing their profits, their competitors, especially Samsung, were busy investing in R&D, pouring millions, even billions, into new technologies. But Nokia wasn't worried. In fact, they thought it was a good sign. Chapter 3. Outdated operating system. Speaking of smartphones, that's where Nokia's second mistake came in, their operating system. Meanwhile, Apple created iOS, which was extremely user-friendly and fun. Plus, it was beautifully designed. But that wasn't all. All of this would change when Apple introduced the App Store, by the way. Google did something similar with Android, which caused Symbian's downfall to accelerate. And unfortunately, this indecisiveness would lead them to make their third mistake. Chapter 4. Poor management. Over the years, Nokia underwent 5 CEO changes, which may sound like a good thing, but it really wasn't. On top of that, the board of directors was constantly changing, which meant that they rarely worked in harmony with the CEOs. But maybe all of this could have been forgiven if Nokia hadn't made their fourth mistake, betting on Microsoft. Now, I'm not saying that Windows Phone was a bad OS. To make matters worse, this deal drove a stake through Nokia's heart. Chapter 5. The collapse. With their future looking bleak, Nokia began closing offices and laying off employees. Now, I know many of you are wondering why Microsoft paid so much if Nokia was basically done. Well, they paid for the patents. However, this didn't work out either, since Microsoft also killed off Nokia's phone business in 2017. But do not worry. Nokia lives on. Today they make about 10 to 15% profit margins, which isn't bad. But they're also a fraction of what they once were. Chapter 6. Lessons learned. So what can we learn from Nokia's collapse? Well, here are 4. 1. Never stop innovating. 2. 3. Support developers and ecosystems. People buy devices based on apps and services. 4. Clear leadership and timely decisions are crucial. Constant changes in leadership and strategy can destroy even the biggest of companies. Do you think Nokia could have avoided their fate?